Hey YouTubers, welcome to another monthly blog about Hytale. This one coming to you on June 29th, 2020. They have just released their latest blog and it's centered around landscape generation. And it's very interesting, so let's go ahead and take a look at it. First thing to discuss is sending you back to January 2019 to take a look again at the introduction to World Gen, which is how they're building their worlds. If you remember, back in that topic, they discussed the different biomes and how things will be placed in the world, how the caves will have unique looks based on the biome they're in, how there will be objects that are placed in the world that are already generated, and how basically no matter what world you generate, it's still going to have the story elements that you're playing for. That's a very cool feature and something that we've never seen before. In this one, they went ahead and discussed basically just how they create the terrain. And this might come off as sounding like it could be like a boring blog at this point, but really, it's really interesting. And it kind of definitely gives you an idea of how map generation in Hytale is different from other games. Actually, I'm familiar with noise maps because I've worked on maps before in Arc with their modding. And as I've mentioned before, they have tools there, which are really good tools. But when it comes to actually making like a height map, you have to use like a third-party tool to do that, which is similar with other games as well. So basically, what a height map is it can define the terrain based on like a color scheme. So let's say you open up Photoshop or Paint and you take a white plain mat and you just drew over it like a black circle. If you take that and import it into a game where you can make a map, that black circle would basically be a low area. It would be like a big round hole in the ground. If you took a white circle and put it in the center of that black circle, well then that white circle would be raised and it would be like a round hilltop. And it depends on the color, so it goes from like black to gray to white. Depending on the color will give you different terrain levels. Now, Hytale's seems it's a little bit more complex than that. It's not just that simple. I'm just giving you a simplification of how height maps work in general. So the first image, it shows just a little bit of that. And as you can see, it's basically gray to white. And so the lighter areas, like I said, that will be raised terrain when it comes to making the map. Now, if you go down a little bit more, you have a little video here, and it's showing rivers and mountains being formed. They're not showing you what they're doing in the background with the blacks and the whites, but basically where the river is, that's going to be dark, and as the terrain gets up higher, that's the lighter colors. If you were looking at a flat image, that's how they're doing this, using their own tools, which is pretty cool, and it shows you step by step how the terrain gets lifted. Now, granted, you wouldn't have it like this. You wouldn't do step by step. You would basically just load it in there and it would just be boom all up together. But they're showing you, they specifically made this to show you, how this was going to work, like in a step by step progress. It's really cool. All right, so moving on, let's talk about coverage. So whenever you have your map done, and this is similar to other games, once you have your terrain done, it's time to fill in that terrain. So with Arc in particular, let's say you have your terrain, you've got it all mapped out, you zoom into an area where you want, let's say, it to be a desert. So you take a paintbrush as part of the tool set that you have and you pick a ground color that looks like that's set for desert, be like sand, and then you go through and you kind of like paint it on like you would in Photoshop or whatever, where you're like brushing over the area. I don't know if they do it the same way, but it does look similar as to how they do it here. The next step after you paint the terrain, so you paint the snow in the snow area where you want the snow at, you'd have a brush for grass, you'd have a brush for, it could be rock terrain, so you have all these different brushes and you would paint the whole terrain, which takes hours if not days of time to do this. And then at that point, after you do that, then it's time to fill in the area with your vegetation, your trees, rocks, things like that. So I don't know how they do it on this game, but basically it's by render distance. So if you have like small rocks and you're going to have numerous small rocks or grass, you may have to put grass elements onto the map, like a tiny little model of a rock or a tiny little model of grass, and you put it all over the map. Well, as you can imagine, the more of those you have, the more memory and the more resources it's going to take the computer to run. So with this, it looks like they've kind of solved a lot of those problems. And I know when it comes to render distance, and that's any game, those smaller items, they pop in as you get closer. But then you have the bigger things, which are considered what they consider far resources or far elements, and those things you can see from further away. So like big trees, you'll see those really far away. And you see that on this image here, where you see, you've got the hillside, and they've actually gone through and they've made this part of the map blank. Well, as you get closer, you'll start to see the grass pop in. But you see trees, even in the far distance of this image, you can see the trees far away. So that's like far stuff versus near stuff. And I'm pretty sure they're working with something similar here with that. It's still an interesting process to see up close, and it gives you a little bit of, insight into how this works. They call them layers, of course, and they're also using noise map. So they have different noise maps they're using. They have stuff with vegetation on it, and then they have, of course, the actual noise map for the shape of the land. And then they also, and in the next image, they actually show you how they've put bushes and mushrooms and things like that down. And they call that Zone 3. All right, so let's go down. They're talking about cover as well. And they show a nice little example of a desert as well. And they have what they call prefabs, which I call like meshes or models from other games. But they have prefabs where they've made all these different trees and all these rock formations. And I think they're basically just kind of like brushing them on the landscape or placing them on, or they have it set to where it's automatically going to generate once they do it. So that's really cool. So basically, they have these height maps that go into the system, and then based on whatever rules they've put in place, these things are just going to pop up wherever they need to go. Now, there is one thing that they mentioned in the January 2019 blog then, where they talked about happy little accidents. And so that's basically when they have different rules for the generation, the landscape. Well, sometimes the rules don't quite match up together, and when they don't, they have these happy little accidents. So they mentioned in that post where you could have a sudden cavern that pops up, right, or a ravine that pops up right in the middle of a dungeon or something. A dungeon that's already supposed to be there, but then something happened where parts of the map just didn't quite want to work out. So instead of it being like bugged or whatever, it turns itself into a ravine, or you'll have like a river that cuts through something. Those are really cool things, and that's what's really going to set this apart. And whenever you have developers talking about how their own system has surprised them and caused these happy little accidents, that's a great thing. And that's something that's gonna make each world feel even more different. All right, so let's move on. They do show a little video that basically shows the land going from just being plain to painted to vegetation, trees, all of that. And you can just see the difference. Like, you got hills in the background that you can't even see once the trees pop in, and that's great. I also really like their trees as well. They're nice looking, and I believe, unlike Minecraft, whenever you actually chop a tree down, the leaves come with it. They don't just stay floating up in the air, which to me that's one of my biggest annoyances of Minecraft. All right, so there is another part of their height maps, which is the prefab system. So remember the prefabs, that's any of the models. That's the trees, the buildings, the rocks, things of that nature. The great thing about Hytale also is that you are going to be able, if you're a modder, you are going to be able to go in and adjust these things. You can put your own prefabs in, you can create your own. They're going to give you the tools to where you can create your own little watchtowers that can be placed there, on the map, or your own NPCs that you can create, or maybe your own trees or whatever. These are things that are going to really open up options with this, and you're going to see that at the end of this video. You're going to see what they did, and it was just amazing. But looking at this height map, it looks like cells. If you're familiar at all with any kind of science, when you're looking at cells in like a microscope, that's what this looks like. It looks like cells, and those purple dots on there, those are areas where it's okay for prefabs to go. So when looking at an overview of the map itself, prefabs will only go in those purple spots, and they said the purple spots on this particular example make up about 20% of the map itself. So that's kind of cool that 20% of the map could have a prefab on it of some sort. Whether it could just be a tree or something, that you're getting something special in that area. So that's really cool. So looking at the next image, this is just an example. And I really like the bear that you see down in the lower left corner. That's really cool. I really love the animal designs and even the character designs of this. But as you can see, this looks kind of like a forest that's in fall. And just imagine coming through the forest and you've come upon this big ruin, and there's something in there because it's part of their whole prefab thing. Is, you know, when these things are generated, there's a reason to go in there. It's not just there for looks. There's other games you've played where there could just be a ruin there, and maybe you'll find some sort of, it could be like an entry, like some kind of log entry or lost relic. You might find one little item there, but this is something for you to go in and actually explore, and there's more to it than just, it's just there. And that's particularly important. They do talk about that they're actually going to be going into a deeper dive next time. They're going to talk about the cave systems and the dungeons and how the zones are going to intersect with each other. So definitely looking forward to whenever they go a little bit more into world generation and more of the dungeons themselves and the cave systems, because that's, I think that's going to be where the strength of this game kind of lies at, especially in the replayability of this game. Alright, so let's go ahead. The last image, this is just one that they came up with as an example just to show you what the system can do, what modders are going to be able to do with this system. And I know you're looking at it and you're like, you know, it's, and the trees are beautiful in that, by the way. I really love that they have that willow look and they're glowing. That's just an amazing thing. You can see some interesting pink rock formations. This is supposed to be a sci-fi setting, so they're just showing you what you can do. This isn't going to be something you're going to see in the game, but it could be something that someone puts out there as a sci-fi type of map, and I could only assume that they're also going to, you know, kind of cater to a sci-fi theme. So you may have different weapons, or you may have different boss fights or dungeons or whatever. So the possibilities for this, especially once it gets into the modders' hands, it's going to be freaking amazing. So anyway, that takes care of this update. That's all that they posted. It's kind of short, but I know that it's leading into a holiday weekend as well. I'm glad that we got it before the holiday. The landscape generation, even though it seems kind of like a dull subject, to me it's very fascinating. And anyone who's interested in this game should really be following that part as well, because it's really going to blow your mind whenever you're able to get in there and see some of these things in person. Anyway, please like and subscribe. Comment below. Let's talk about what's going on with the landscape, what you think about it. Tell me what you think about that sci-fi setting and what you're looking forward to with Hytale. Anyway, take care, and we'll see you next time.